boy Blue Getsuga, and today I'll be talking about basically Manga Myriad because last night, or at least last night of the day currently recording, someone brought up Ragnar Myriad and asked whether or not they think it could come back, and I guess the person who posted that comment said that it should come back, to which I'd have to hard disagree. And there was also other people replying to that comment saying only if Gossip Shadow got banned. Which at the time Ragnar Myriad was banned, you could argue that it was Gossip Shadow, you know, like making Ragnar Myriad a very busted and toxic card. But let's be real, if it wasn't a problem then, it would have been a problem now in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! Same thing with cards like Maxi, or As a Thought, or True King of All Calamities, aka VFD. The problem all these cards have is that in current Yu-Gi-Oh! They pretty much stop you from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For an entire turn. Or at least most of the time. I mean, like, if you're playing a trap deck, you probably wouldn't care about VFD all that much. But let's be real. The reason these cards are banned is because the game is actually too fast, and simply missing out on a turn can actually be enough for your opponent to put you in the dirt. That is the real reason these cards are banned. When these cards first came out, they weren't broken. Maybe Maxi, but at the same time you could also argue Maxi wasn't all that broken. If your opponent dropped Maxi at best, they'd probably trade out, or at worst for the Maxi player, they don't get to draw any cards, but that isn't really too much of a problem. They got to stop you from making plays, and then they get a chance to play. But at the same time, you having to stop your turn just to avoid letting your opponent draw a bunch off of Maxi wasn't actually all that terrible back then. Because not that many decks had the ability to just OTK like that, or build really, really powerful and unbreakable boards. But in today's Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you resolve Maxi, it's practically an automatic win. Practically. I mean, obviously there's going to be cases where your opponent actually somehow manages to play around Maxi, or you skip your turn and your opponent whiffs and doesn't completely obliterate you. But the problem is, in today's Yu-Gi-Oh!, you drop Maxi, it resolves. What is your opponent going to do? Let you draw half your deck? Even the most basic decks actually make it so you have to special summon a bunch of monsters just to do basic plays. Not even make really impressive boards or anything, just basic plays, your basic streamline plays. And guess what? It's okay, your opponent draws 3 cards because you just felt like doing a basic play in your archetype. And let's say you decide not to special summon and just allow your opponent to either fizzle, the opponent's Maxi just to fizzle or draw 1 card. In today's Yu-Gi-Oh!, your opponent could just do a bunch of 1 card, 2 card, or even 3 card combos and then just completely annihilate you within a duel. Skipping a turn in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! is practically a death sentence, which is why Maxi is banned, and it should honestly stay banned. And the same thing with cards like As a Thought. But the reason why As a Thought is banned is because, people were finding ways to just special summon it on the opponent's turn. But it still follows the same principle. Whereas back then, if your opponent special summoned As a Thought on your turn, what are they going to do? What does it do against you, right? You skip a turn, your opponent fails to OTK you because not many decks at the time were capable of doing so, and you get a chance to play in it. You can swing the game back in your favor, especially given how back then you actually had to use a lot more resources just to do things like this. And the same thing with Ragnar Myriad, whereas I remember playing against Ragnar Myriad a lot back on back on Dueling Nexus even. When this card first came out, it wasn't much of a problem. My opponent used to summon these things out a lot at the time. It's okay, I just set monsters that are either too big for Ragnar Myriad to either run over, or I just set monsters that float, or monsters with very great graveyard effects. And even then, it's your opponent, and this card loses material each turn, right? And it's not if my opponent decides just to use 2 material, I can just wait out and stall out a turn, And then the next turn, this thing would just be at 1500 attack, and that's not all that hard to get over. Just basically set a monster with higher defense. It fails to run it over, and then I don't know. It's pretty easy to out this card, especially you get out it with things with basic trap cards. The only thing is when they have 3 material, it doesn't make it hard to do that. But at the same time, like I mentioned, not only did missing a turn not matter as much back then, but but at the same time, your opponent also just fails to end you with Ragnaminiad. It's especially since if to get 3 material on this card, they have to give up a lot of resources just to do so, meaning that you don't have to worry about your opponent closing out the game on you with ease. And then you could just basically out this thing, or you could just do what I used to do back then when I used to face this card a lot. Just take the damage on the chin. Oh, okay, you poked me for 3,000. That's cool. That's great. I'm just building resources. And then you poke me for another 3,000? And that's assuming that you actually got 3 material on this card? Alright, whatever. Oh, but if I'm running low on life points, just set a monster, especially with a lot of defense. And by that time, this thing would have 1500 attack. They attack into that monster, and then that monster gets flipped up. I switch it to attack on my turn, and then potentially just outrun the Miniad. Or just set a Mirror Force, or Breakthrough Scale, or Fiendish Chain, because remember when people ran Fiendish Chain? Yeah, like this card was a lot easier to out back then. And the same thing with VFD. Granted, when VFD came out, it was almost at that point where cards like this, or I guess cards like these, would honestly just break the game. But at the same time, VFD was fine at the time since not many things could summon it, and even then, VFD was still outable with things like Mirror Force, and I think Lost Wind was out at the time. Lost Wind. There was many ways to out this thing. It's just that in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, where decks must be fast, meaning that most people would be playing combo decks or decks that aren't trap heavy, they would actually struggle against this thing. But again, in today's Yu-Gi-Oh, this thing trips up a lot of decks. If you're like stopping your opponent from just activating monster effects prematurely to where they, prior to them being able to respond, actually does a lot of damage. And that's practically the whole reason why cards like this actually are bannable. You may be arguing, okay, what about cards like Dimensional Barrier? Well, Dimensional Barrier depends on the matchup. And sometimes, in some matchups, Dimensional Barrier wouldn't help you. But I mean, come on. And on top of that, a lot of decks now play multiple different mechanics, so Dimensional Barrier doesn't really completely prevent your opponent from doing anything. Hell, you could be playing a deck that doesn't rely on ritual summoning, fusion summoning, and all those other different summonings. Or they could rely on it, but at the same time, they don't need it to actually do damage to you. So, and plus it's a trap card, so you have to set it. Plus it's not searchable. Whereas this thing is in your extra deck, so you pretty much have access to a lot of these extra deck monsters. Which is another reason why extra deck monsters are kind of more broken compared to things like non-searchable, broken spells and traps. So that's why I feel like these cards are actually banned and cannot ever come back unless they get an errata. These cards were fine, was fine then, but broken now. These cards cannot come back because of the way the game is, which kind of sucks. I say kinda because it's like, again, no one had a problem with these cards until these cards just became absolute game enders. And Yu-Gi-Oh, in my opinion, was a lot more fun when games weren't just decided in a single turn like that. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about my observation, and it's been me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'm out.